Shalom, shalom, friends. Thank you for joining us today on the live stream or in the recording. We're thrilled to have this Valley Beit Midrash podcast with you today, where we are inspired by Ben Zoma from Pirkei Avot 4:1, Ezehu Chacham Halomed Mikol Adam, who is a wise one who can learn from all people. And that is what wisdom is, to be able to have a learning orientation towards all people and towards all encounters. And that is something that our two great guests live by and are great models for us. Abby Pogrebin is the author of the National Jewish Book Award finalist, My Jewish Year, 18 Holidays, One Wandering Jew, and Stars of David, Prominent Jews Talk About Being Jewish. He's written for The Atlantic, Ford, and Tablet, and moderates public conversations for the Stryker Center and the Jewish Broadcasting Service. We also have here Rabbi Dov Linzer, who is the president and Rosh HaYeshiva, rabbinic head of Yeshivat Har Torah, an Orthodox Rabbinical School and Torah Center, which promotes a more open and inclusive Orthodoxy. He's written for the Forward, Tablet, and New York Times and hosted highly popular Torah podcasts. It's really fascinating to have a renowned journalist and a renowned halakhist and Talmudist come together in conversation in such a fun project, which I hope everyone will pick up. It Takes Two to Torah. An Orthodox rabbi and Reformed journalist discuss and debate their way through the 5 books of Moses. So what is this about? This book is the product of two people literally meeting in the middle to bring us the most honest, intellectual, and relevant understanding of the Torah. Pogrebin and Linzer engaged in short dialogues on a podcast for Tablet magazine, and they've been now collected and edited so that the full fascinating exploration can be found in one place. This book is a Torah conversation starter for families on Shabbat, for religious school instructors with students of all ages, for individuals who have never found a way to read the entire Torah in bite-size, relatable nuggets, and for young clergy looking for some sermon ideas if they're stuck. Most of all, it's a snapshot of what Torah study is meant to be, a real-time, candid, instructive, challenging exchange of responses to ancient text. It Takes Two to Torah is not just an education, it's an invitation to join the oldest book club in the world. Friends, I have found this book to be inspiring, smart, funny, sweet, and magically accessible. So let me start with how we got here. Tell me, Abby and Rabbi Linzer, how did this come together?
Well, I'll start, even though he's the teacher of teachers, as you know very well. And I start with first gratitude, because it is so good to be with you again. I had the pleasure of interviewing you about your amazing book just a little while ago, and it's really nice to have this kind of exchange of ideas on a podcast that I'm a fan of. I would say it's really coming out of a friendship, a real friendship that started very naturally and organically when Dov and I were invited to go to a Jewish conference that you may have been part of called The Conversation. Sadly, it is not convened anymore, but it was convened by the Jewish Week, and basically was journalists, clergy, thinkers, writers, not-for-profit heads, all in one retreat in Baltimore. And we were asked to basically have sessions that allowed us to air whatever was on our mind Jewishly, the questions, the hurdles, the tsuris. And Rabbi Linzer and I kind of kept landing in the same sessions, and we would often not just spar, but kind of end up talking after it was all over, and wanted that conversation to continue. And it did. I mean, very naturally, Dov would reach out to me when he was writing an op-ed for the New York Times, and I'm kind of the inveterate, very controlling New York editor. And he helped me enormously on my book that you mentioned, My Jewish Year, when I really needed the Judaism to be, frankly, accurate. And there was a lot of Judaism and a lot of kind of recounting of the Chagim, and he did that very generously. And finally, he came to me and said, we should bring our Torah conversations kind of to life in a live, kind of real-time way. And Tablet Magazine very graciously said yes, and we had a podcast for 2 years, and it was absolutely a delight. And we prepared for everyone, and then we kind of had at it and let it flow. 10 minutes for Parsha. People very, again, generously enjoyed it, but they said we can't keep up with it, and we wish it lived in one place. And so a publisher named Fred Price at Fig Tree Books said, I'm going to actually turn this into a book. And he then put us through tremendous rigor to make sure it worked on the page.
Yeah, thank you, Abby. You have so much covered, really, what led up to this and how we got here. I want to also say, Rav Shmuly, it's great to be on this podcast. Thank you for having us, and I'm a huge fan of your work. We go way back, when you were just a rabbinical student at Co-Author Torah, and you have made such a change in the world, both through your written word and your ideas, and the work that you do out there translating your Torah values into real world action. So I just get pride and nachas every day. And I just wanted to it's wonderful to be on this podcast with you. I guess I'll just add to what Abby already said so beautifully that, what I remember about that early meeting in the conversation when we first connected, the Jewish Week conversation, was we always were seeming to land in the same rooms, and we would always start talking to one another and be constantly pulled in. We found in each other, I think, a real curiosity, openness, and a new perspective that we hadn't been, that we don't always hear within the circles that we operate. Particularly, I remember that I was really passionate at that time. I had two boys who were on the spectrum and the autism spectrum, and I was frustrated that there was not Torah that was accessible to them. They couldn't read Hebrew. Even the English was just too text heavy. And I had this idea of doing like a graphics novel Torah, Tanakh, and like we didn't have any good one in the Jewish space. And I was sharing this with Abby, and she was so passionate about it, and she totally latched on. And I think that's like what brought us together was a love of Torah and a curiosity of different perspectives and an openness to learn, and about making it accessible to people and bringing people into the conversation. And one of the things I think is great about the book is, both literally and metaphorically, there's a lot of white space on the page, because it's a conversation. It's not like these big, dense paragraphs. Let me tell you all of my collected wisdom on the Parsha. There's a lot of give and take and exchange, and the pages are open and they're an invitation. And the way we want people to learn from our ideas, sure, but we want people to engage in the conversation themselves. And that's so much of what the book is about.
Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you. Yeah, this is by far the easiest to read and most enjoyable to read Parsha commentary I've read. Let me just read a little cute passage from Parshat Bechukotai. Abby, the Parsha Bechukotai, by my decrees, lists all the terrible tragedies that will befall the Jewish people if they violate God's commandments. It's a pretty terrifying list. Rabbi Linzer, and it goes on and on and on. Abby, for me, the main question that came up in reading this parsha was, should God or should we threaten people to get them to do the right thing? If you're asking me, that's a really bad motivator. Rabbi Linzer, yes, I agree, it's not ideal, but I do think that often it's necessary in life and even in religion. I'm okay with that. I think this tension plays out a lot in parenting. Abby, parenting? You mean all of us perfect parents who never threaten our children? Rabbi Linzer, right. Listen, it's not standard parenting procedure, but I think sometimes when our kids aren't listening to us or they're misbehaving, we often do have to threaten punishment. Abby, maybe your kids aren't listening to you, Dov. Rav Linzer, sure, it's just me, Abby. Look, I'm ambivalent about it. We're human. We're driven by what we might get in return, what motivates us, a salary, a reward, a nice trophy, or by punishments or negative consequences if we do something wrong. Sometimes people are going to do their best work because they're being held accountable. I point to this one not only because it's funny and it's sweet, but because
First of all,
touches.
You have just modeled something we've never seen, which is like this works when one person recounts it. I mean, first of all, you have great theatrical talent. But
what a dramatic reading! 10 points.
But I interrupted you. Sorry, Rabbi. Go ahead.
No, it's okay. Please keep going. Keep going.
No, I just think that that's part of what we're hoping here is that, and you use the word cute. I won't argue with it. I want to make sure that people know it's substantive, and with anything with Dov is going to be. But what it also is that wherever we were in our lives, I mean, this is what you all teach us all the time. And I'm the layperson here. I'm the one without semikha coming at this text and saying, why does Bechukotai matter right now? How does it matter for my parenting? How does it matter for me as a friend? How does it matter for me as someone who works for someone else? These ideas that we should absolutely parse in terms of the tradition, but we should also kick the tires on how it should speak to our lives. And I don't mean sitting back and saying, inspire me or connect me. But I do think this is technology that sometimes we forget how to apply. right now.
Beautiful. Beautiful. I love that. So I wonder if each of you can share some specific aspect of Torah that you feel became a little more clear for you during this journey together.
Dov?
Yeah, I think, well, one of the things that was such an eye-opener to me, that Abby said something and it was like, oh my God, that's right there in the text. How did I never see that? Was near the end of the Torah, where the Torah talks about the mitzvah that the king should write for himself a Sefer Torah and have it with him all of his life. And, the next verse goes on to say that he shouldn't be haughty, and he should not have, gather all these horses and return the people to Egypt. So I've always approached that as, you might be the leader, but you're under the law, you're under God, and you have to always remember that. But Abby looked at it and she said, I read this and it's telling me we have to be lifelong learners. We always have to have the Torah with us. We always have, no matter where we've reached at life, we always have to be saying, what more is there for me to learn? And have that curiosity and always approach life as a lifelong learner. And, to me, it's like, oh my God, how did I not see that? And it made me realize that even though I have been a lifelong learner, I mean, my whole world is books, learning, teaching, and so on, my perspective has been very narrow. 99.9% of my conversations are within a bubble of people that share the same religious commitments as I do, the same approach to text as I do, the same lens that they bring to the text. And I have not, really engaged seriously enough. Sure, different ideas in the larger world, but people with different perspectives engaging the texts that I engage with in such an intensive way. So, really, I think it opened up the text for me. That's just one small example. It's throughout the book, but it also was so, symbolic of the way in which Abby has taken this lifelong learner and made them a different type of a learner. So I really am just
beautiful. Thank you, Abby.
Well, I want to talk about Ruvain or Ruben. I don't know which you prefer. But we had a real argument about whether he actually has courage or didn't step up. And I really felt like he fell short. I still do. Dov did not convince me. But he did give me pause on, in a way, my judgmentalness or my rush to condemn the fact that he didn't save Joseph when I thought it was clear that he could. What Rabbi Linzer pointed out was that he did more than anyone else. And that in our lives, to take a step towards trying to affect something has to be acknowledged and admired and noted and maybe lifted up. And I'm looking at kind of the glass half empty, which is that Joseph ended up in that pit. And Dov is saying, but he survived. And he survived because of this brother. So that's just one of those examples that I do think, and I'm not saying that every single verse translates to contemporary life, but how many times have we each said, I can't make a difference here? And certainly I know, Shmuly, you live, more than most, at least you shame me in terms of living that in your daily life. How can I actually affect something and to feel like you actually have the capacity to change something bad into something better? And that to me is what's the takeaway from Vayeshev.
I love that. I love Rabbi Linzer's point here around lifelong learning and learning outside of our bubble and being in conversation and have fresh reads on the text. And I love your point here, Abby, around really how we can flip judgment into curiosity and how we're all bystanders in a complicated moral world. And when we can't do it all, how can we do something? And sometimes saying doing something in a complex world is enough. So what are some areas where you think you may have gotten closer in agreement around how you think about Torah in this journey? And what are some areas that you say, it's okay, we totally disagree, and that's all right also?
I'm going to cheat and start from the second one because it's more fun. And it picks up on something Abby mentioned about the Ruvain discussion. And that's how we approached the whole Sota ritual, where the Torah talks about a woman who is suspected by her husband of having committed adultery. And the text says, basically, on a whim, he can capriciously, he has this suspicion and jealousy. He drags her to the temple and he makes her drink this water, go through a ritual, a debasing ritual. And you write curses on a parchment and scrape the ink into the water, and she drinks the water. And it just sounds so horrific on so many levels.
Just to their viewers who I know are going to be very literate, that it's not like she's drinking water. She's drinking inky water. Like, it's disgusting.
A few words. That was great. What we put in our mouths in general every day is much more disgusting than a little ink. But anyway, moving on. Because I approach the Torah as coming from God, and I approach it with reverence, and I also like the Reuven story. I recognize that all the characters in the Torah are human and flawed, and they sin, but there's also a reverence that goes there. I want to be seeing the good. So I'm asking myself, how do I make terms with this ritual and a belief in that God is good, the Torah is good? What do I do with that? And to me, the path I found, and every time I say this, Abby's eyebrows go up, or she just cannot hear this, or whatever. No, I'm sure she hears it, but can't agree with this, is that let's try to put it in a historical context, sort of like, Reuven didn't do the best, but he did the best that he could. So, and if in a time where husbands could, patriarchal power could unilaterally, because they suspected their wives of adultery, have their wives killed and executed, and the Torah wants to rein that in. And the Torah says, you're not going to be able to do it summarily. You have to, go through this process, and maybe the process cools you down. And more importantly, if it's the opposite of a witch trial, because if nothing happens, it proves that she's innocent. It's only if something miraculous happens that she, something happens to her body, that that she's guilty. So the text is, the process is almost rigged that she's going to be found innocent, unless God decides to intervene. So to me, this is not where we want to get as a society, but it's taking society where it was and moving it in the right direction. And Abby, still to this day, just cannot.
It's so reassuring that they set up this awful test to be fair. I mean, that to me seems like the ultimate pretzeling of kind of rabbinic interpretation, and softening a text that, on its face, just is speaking very clearly. And I understand the effort, and I respect it, to find the good in things. But I think part of the lesson is actually realizing some texts are irredeemable.
Abby, what are some areas where you feel you got closer in understanding?
Yeah, I'll take the good side of things. I think where he really brought me along was on why Moses didn't get to go into the promised land. That was really a struggle for me. Like, I just felt the pathos, almost like the tragic movie scene of, cresting the hill and seeing this glorious land of milk and honey that you have worked so hard to get your people to, out of bondage, and you don't get to taste it. That just felt like, what's the lesson there? And really what Rabbi Linzer just kept pushing me to think about is whether we actually have to kind of have new leaders that graduate those who started the fight, who started the journey. There is something about passing that torch fully. And I said, well, can he at least go along? And just the idea that this is part of what I think we all have to do in our lives, is know when it's not your time anymore. Know when it's someone else's time to lead, and summon the courage. And that if you have the old leaders with you, you're not actually going to embolden the new.
Love that. Yeah, I've been thinking about Joe Biden these days, and just the ability for all of us to step back at moments when we're in the thick of it and we feel like we're the one, we're called. But yeah, that great humility. And so that's awesome that you came closer on understanding that, or not just understanding that, of seeing that similarly. So Rav Linzer,
Shmuly, can I add something?
Yes.
I want to say that one way among many that Abby sort of drew me close was, if it's not already obvious, I want to say, Abby, I don't know if I've ever said these words to you, but Abby is a very religious person, and we practice in different ways, but a deep religiosity towards God and life and people. And I have sometimes been very moved when she's shared with me, when you, Abby, have shared with me some of your practices, talking about saying Moda'ani in the morning and cultivating a sense of gratitude, saying Shema in the evening, and thinking about whatever has happened to me today, it's from God, and I'm thankful to God. Things that as a Orthodox Jew, I do as a matter of course. I do the performance and the act of it, but sometimes not with nearly as much intention. And I've really been inspired by hearing from that from Abby and
well,
Brian.
I so appreciate that. And I want to call out, maybe if I could, that part of what we haven't talked about today, and I don't think actually Dov and I ever have out loud, is that there is an assumption that the Reformed Jew is in a way the inferior one. That just is out there. And those of you who may want to deny it, I appreciate it, but it just still exists, that there's this hierarchy. And I feel it sometimes myself. I think the internalization of, do I know enough? And am I religious enough? Am I pious enough? Do I know enough Hebrew? Can I say it as fast? All those things. And part of what I hope this book does is it's not just like you too, you Reformed person or even non-denominational person are entitled to this foundational text. But I think what Dov's gift is there was never a kind of condescension about hearing my ideas. There was a sense that genuinely what you read in the beginning, it was a benzoma, that we have to learn. Each of us can be a teacher. And no, there is not an equality in terms of my scholarship and Rav Linzer, nor with yours, Shmuly. That's just the reality. I haven't done what you've done. I have so much humility about this. And it's why I turn to both of you constantly as a learner, as a student. But I also think we have to be careful of just the patterns that do exist of kind of like, it's kind of adorable, the little things that you do over there. And we do the real stuff over here.
That's a very important point. So now that the great benefit of this podcast for me is that I've learned my talent of reading both of your words theatrically. So I'm going to take another stab at that briefly from Parshat Bamidbar. Abby says, this Parsha puts me in a little bit of a bad mood. Virtually every other Parsha has spoken to me in some way, but this one I scroll through verse by verse, and it's just a tedious list. Rabbi Linzer, there's a reason it's called Numbers. Abby, yeah, because it's numbing. How about that? Rabbi Linzer, exactly. So Rabbi Linzer, I know you're my Rosh Yeshiva in Yeshiva. I know you're my Rosh Yeshiva. What do we do with boring Torah, so to speak? Torah that feels numbing, so to speak.
Well, before I answer that, I just want to say, besides that you are such an amazing reader.
Amazing. We got to take him on the road. Literally.
Is that one of the reasons that this has succeeded so well is because we have fun together. And I want to say, and it's okay, and you make jokes, and that is actually enhances the learning experience. And bringing a sense of fun to learning, I just think that's what's so compelling about our relationship and about how the Torah presented in the book. So how do we do with Torah that is boring? Look, the rabbis say that, traditionally we're supposed to, is that like every word of the Torah is of equal weight and equal importance. And Maimonides was very upset when people had to practice to stand when the 10 Commandments were read, because he said, well, they're not more important than any other verse in the Torah. But you know what? Maimonides sort of lost that battle, because we all do stand when the 10 Commandments are read. So I try to push myself to find, something that I can get out of the text. But I think we're also allowed to be human and allowed to engage the texts that are more compelling to us as well. But I would not just sidelight them. I would pause to ask, what is there something here that I can be learning, I can be getting? Let me think about it just a little bit more deeply than my first reaction.
Beautiful. Awesome. So Abby, last question. There is so much content out in the world these days. I can spend my whole Sunday morning reading the New York Times. When I'm at the gym, I can listen to all my podcasts. There's 20 great novels a year that we can spend our time reading. Why should we still turn to Torah? Why should as modern people who are so busy, right, as parents, as professionals, as citizens, right, active in politics and volunteering and whatever, whatever we do, why should we still look to Torah?
Yeah, it's such a great question. And I'm going to answer it on one foot, because this question I was not prepared for. And it's fundamental to why this book. I think, first of all, we have to address the moment we're in, when so many people are telling us what we are. They're characterizing what a Jew is, what a Jew believes, what a Jew comes from. And I feel like it's great that people are buying Stars of David and they're putting up their mezuzot, or they're not taking them down. But I also want people to kind of return to the substance of who we are. And this book, to me, is the scaffolding. And it can't be ignored, and it has to be wrestled with, and you may not love it all. But if there's anything that I've learned in it is that when you engage it, when you speak to it or speak about it, it begins to speak back. And you suddenly see that everything that you do and everything that you choose and prioritize or don't do there is some referendum on the moment that you're in these pages. It's the magic of it. And to me, it's why it has endured. Because if you look at thousands of years of a book, why is this? It's not just because of rote. It's not just because of guilt. There's a reason why this book stays alive. And so that's, to me, a sense of you got to be curious about why this is still the biggest book club in the world. And wherever you are in your life, you have a seat at this table. And it's important to pull up a chair before you've assumed either that you're done and you know it, or that you've never actually tried it.
Beautiful, beautiful. Friends, I highly recommend you pick up It Takes Two to Torah. Whether you're the type of person who wants to sit down and read the whole book in a weekend, or you want to just read each Parsha each week, it's an incredible opportunity to bring to life new Torah that you haven't thought of before from two amazing scholars, two model Jews who are committed to a humble search and to intellectual honesty and what it means to be a part of Am Yisrael, for the Jewish people to learn together from the greatest book ever written. Thank you, Rav Linzer. Thank you, Abby.
Thank you.
It's wonderful to be with you.
Thank you.
Great to be with you.
So wonderful to be here.